Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a new release bait that I just got my hands on. This bait came out no more than 2 weeks ago. It is brand new to the market and is going to be amazing on these northeast fisheries up here. So if you live anywhere in the north or anywhere in the country for that matter, we'll be offering some tips on how to fish this bait to catch some fish. Specifically in the northeast here though, I think this is going to be a deadly weapon this year because it will be effective at catching largemouth and smallmouth bass. So stay tuned and let's get right into it. All right, so what is this new bait that we're going to be talking about in today's episode? That is going to be the Sixth Sense Fishing Crube 3.0. Basically, this is a craw tube. Some people probably already know about this. It's a bait that's been around for a while, but this is Sixth Sense version of it. They've done some cool things with this bait. It is going to be very effective, and it has some little features in here that are super cool details that will help you catch more fish than over other craw tubes. And on top of that, this is the 3.0, which means 3 inches, so it's a very, very small profile. Which we'll talk about here later on different ways to rig this bait, which will allow you to catch a bunch of fish on this thing. So let's jump into the video. We're going to talk about what type of gear you need to fish this. We're going to talk about 2 methods that I think this is going to work really, really well. One is going to be geared more for largemouth. One is going to be geared more for smallmouth. Not saying you can't catch either doing either technique, but it will be more effective on different types of bodies of water that I fish, and I will talk about that as we go through. So before we talk about gear, we'll talk quickly about what this bait is, what colors it comes in, how you want to pick that stuff, and why this bait is going to be effective. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to actually rig this bait on the 2 techniques to make sure you're fishing it properly. So what is the Crube, and why is this going to be more effective than other craw tubes on the market out there? The first thing that I noticed with this bait off the bat, which is going to come into play on technique 1 for largemouth, this bait has a solid head. It is a hollow body tube just like any other tube out there. It has literally, you can shove a jig head or scents or anything you want inside there. You could put rattles in there, which is going to be awesome being able to actually put scents and stuff like that in there when you fish this. But it has this solid head, and what that's going to do is allow you to put a hook in here, Texas rig style, and it will keep the hook in there rather than when you rig other types of tubes or craw tubes on the market. When you rig those and you set the hook on a fish, it will rip through there and then that tube is done. This will last a little bit longer because it has that solid head meant to keep that hook in place. But the other thing this will do, because it's hollow, is when you set the hook, it will collapse down on a Texas rig and you'll get a good hook set. With this bait being also very slim in profile instead of the big round bulky tubes, you'll also get a better hook set that way. I know with some of the tubes out there on the market, you actually have to use a different type of hook than just an extra wide gap, and that will allow you to get better hook sets. But if you just use an extra wide gap or a regular worm hook or something like that, you won't get as good of hook sets because the bait is literally too thick. So that will collapse down nice and easy. Then it still has the classic tube cut on the back here with the little tentacles. It'll stand up on the bottom and it has a defensive posture when it's on the bottom like a crawfish. That's what it's meant to imitate, but this can imitate more than crawfish. The one that I'm holding in my hand here, we're going to talk about all the different things it could imitate, but you could also get bluegill colored ones. It can imitate a bluegill. This can imitate anything. So it's made to imitate crawfish, but it can do a lot of different things. So let's start with technique 1. A Texas rig is going to be the #1 way that I'm going to fish this thing. So like I said, the first way that I'm going to rig this up is just going to be on a simple Texas rig. It's super effective to do a lot of things with. The rod and reel that I'm going to like to use for this is my Kistler KLX. This is the 7-foot medium heavy, just standard Texas rig fishing stuff. You don't need a fancy rod for this. Just a 7-foot medium heavy will do everything you need with this bait. We're not flipping heavy cover most of the time. We're going to be flipping around the outsides of laydowns. We're going to be flipping some deeper weed lines, but not like matted grass or anything like that. Maybe around some docks. That's the kind of flipping that I'm going to be doing with the craw tube. I have other favorite baits when I'm flipping different types of heavier cover and stuff like that. The Crube is going to be perfect for flipping the outsides of stuff and fishing a Texas rig like you would anything else, or even just fishing this like it would be on a tube jig head, just on a bait caster around some cover and open water. You can do that as well, even though it is on a Texas rig. And then I have a Kistler Series 1 bait casting reel right here. I have this spooled up with 15-pound test fluorocarbon right now. I would go anywhere between 15 and maybe 17, depending on the type of cover that you're fishing. I probably won't go up to 20. Like I said, I have a different setup altogether when I'm flipping some really heavy cover. That's when I'll go to 20-pound test and stuff like that. This is going to be some lighter duty stuff, 15 to 17-pound test, just fine. I wouldn't go down to 12. Might be a little light for that. We'll probably use some lighter pound test in the later technique there. I also have a 7:1 gear ratio here, 7:3 just to pick up a lot of line fast. Anytime I'm fishing a bottom bouncing bait, I want something I can pick up a lot of line fast, get it to me quickly, especially when these fish will eat the bait and swim right at you. Now, for my Texas rig setup here, I have a peg to start, so just a simple sinker peg right there. And then I have a 5/16 ounce Texas rig weight on here right now, but you can use pretty much any size you need depending upon the type of cover you're fishing. If I was going to use this for, say, bed fishing, which would actually be a good use for this bait considering how small it is and the hook taking up most of the bait, I would probably go to like a 3/16 or even a 1/4 ounce, a lightweight, to be able to just gently drag on the bed. If you're burying it down in there and it's stirring up the bed, you can scare those fish away. For general flipping around laydowns and stuff like that, a 5/16, maybe a 3/8, that's going to be where I'm going to go with that. Skipping it around docks, throwing it in some shallower weeds, stuff like that. And then you can go all the way up to like a 1/2 ounce if you're flipping some deeper weeds. A lot of times in the summers when I'll be using this bait as well, our weeds will get out into like 9, 10, 12 foot of water, and it'll take forever for a 5/16 ounce to get down there. And sometimes they're a little thick on the edge that it might get hung up on a plant on the way down, and it might not make it all the way down. So if you use like a 1/2 or even a 5/8, you can get it down there deeper, quicker, down to the bottom where those fish are going to be on that outside weed line, where they're sheltering themselves from the heat, as well as eating all the bluegills that migrate their way out there in the summertime on our northeast fisheries. That's where some of the colors will come into play. This one right here, more smallmouth geared, I think, is the color that I have here. This is the gravel craw color, and it is a brown top, a clearish white belly, and it has a lot of orange glitter in it. This color would perfectly imitate crawfish. It could imitate bluegills a little bit. It's kind of like a green pumpkin-y color, but I would go with a couple of the other colors of Crubes that they have on the website, or even if I'm flipping some deeper weed lines and stuff like that, black and blue in the summertime on our northeast fisheries is like one of my favorite colors, even though it doesn't really imitate anything. We can talk about that more in another video down the road, but that would be some of the colors that I would go with for the Texas rig. For the next one, this gravel craw color would be more of a type of color that I would like to go with, or some of the other crawfish type colors that they have in the Crube. Now the second way that I would fish the Crube here, this is going to be more effective on smallmouth, fishing rocky flats, points, stuff like that. It is going to be technically kind of on a Ned rig. This is just a jig head that I found laying around. My Ned rigs are actually out in the boat right now. But all I will do is rig this up just like you would a finesse TRD or whatever other Ned rig plastic you like. Thread it straight up on a jig head, and that's it. It's super simple fishing. It'll look just like a tube on the bottom. Most tubes anyway, you're gonna shove a tube head up inside, and then the hook will be hanging out exposed just like this. But this has that solid head, so you cannot put a tube head up inside. It will not go all the way up. You could put it in, but then you'll have about a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of bait just sitting out in front of the tube head. It'll just make it act weird and not really fish like a tube should. But if you put it on a jig head, it'll fish very natural, and if you have a keeper at the front of your jig head, it will hold on to that solid head and make sure your tube lasts on there for a very long time. Now, this is more smallmouth geared because it can imitate crawfish, but most importantly, the first thing I thought of when I saw this color, it looks like a goby. Up on Lake Erie, we have a lot of gobies, and the gobies up there have a very dark brown back, and they have a very lighter colored whitish belly, and it looks just like this color, and it has some blotchy appearance to it. I wouldn't say orange exactly like this, but a smallmouth isn't going to inspect it that much. It has that mottled appearance with the dark back and the light belly, the brown with the clearish white on the bottom. And it could look like a crawfish too, but I think this thing is going to mimic gobies up on Lake Erie. Amazing. It has that fat profile to it, which is what gobies look like as well. That's why tubes work so well up on Lake Erie sometimes. This thing would be deadly on a Ned rig up on Lake Erie. or any of the Great Lakes or anywhere that you have smallmouth. I know some of the Finger Lakes up in New York have smallmouth and gobies. It would work awesome up there as well. It is just a bait that can catch smallmouth all over the country if you have a good smallmouth fishery. Now, how would I rig this up? Let's talk about the rod and reel setup here. The first thing that I'm going to go with is a spinning rod instead of a casting rod. So this is my Kistler KLX 7-foot medium action spinning rod, and then I have this on a Kistler Series 1 spinning reel. This is the 2000 size. Anywhere between a 2000 and a 3000 size is what you're looking for. And then you'll notice I have this spooled up with very high vis green braid, and then I will tie a fluorocarbon leader on the end of it. So I'll have about a 10-foot section of 8-pound, maybe 6-pound depending where I'm fishing, maybe even up to 10-pound if I'm around a lot of zebra mussels up on Lake Erie. For the most part, that water's pretty clear. I'm gonna go with 8-pound test. Now that setup right there, I have this lime green braid, so when I throw my bait out there, I can tell when it's on the bottom, so the braid will go out and then lay slack once it's on the bottom. And then once I know it's on the bottom, as I'm fishing it, if a smallmouth picks it up after I stop the bait, you can watch the line jump and you'll be able to get a good hook set on those fish, land them properly, everything you need to do with this rod set up right here. So that is what I'm going to fish this Crube on. Like I said, that color, Gravel Cross specifically, is the one that stood out to me as a goby looking color. There are other ones on the website that look more crawfish-ish colors, or just regular green pumpkins would also work on that setup as well with the jig head. But that would be the second way that I would like to fish this Crube. Those are going to be the two ways that I fish this most often. There are some other ways you could do it as well, but basically on a Ned rig for smallmouth and on a Texas rig for largemouth are going to be the two ways that I like to fish this. And if you enjoyed today's video talking about a new bait out on the market and want to see another new bait that's out on the market, go ahead and click this one right here. I just did a video review type on that bait as well. It's going to be a killer if you fish a lot of grass fisheries. So go ahead and check that one out. Leave a like down below and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my fishing videos coming up.